The most frustrating thing for individuals who claim they've been abducted is that most often nobody believes them, where psychiatrists or other professionals tell them that it is all in their imagination. But what happens when more than one person experiences the same phenomena? They cannot all be accused of imagining or dreaming their strange event. The following 3 stories are about normal, everyday people living in England, going about their daily lives when they experience a strange event that forever changes their perceptions of life. Let's explore these 3 mysterious cases of alien abduction. Number 3. Dorset, England, 1990. One evening, a middle-aged couple named James and Pamela Millen were camping and discussing how peaceful and beautiful the night sky was. It was a very quiet night when they decided to go to bed early. At around 3 a.m, James got up to go to the toilet, and when he exited the tent, he looked across to the field to his right and noticed orangey gold balls bouncing around. He then called his wife to come outside to share his observations. The sky was very clear with a full moon, but they did notice one unusual occurrence. There was an eerie silence, and they were both totally transfixed on the glowing balls, and the atmosphere appeared calm and slow. James then describes how totally relaxed and happy he felt. He then went back into the tent to get his camera to capture this unusual event. Pamela then said that she'd had a strange feeling, then all of a sudden found herself sitting in the tent, observing her husband outside looking at the sky. Her husband then casually walked back inside the tent and said to her, "They've gone now." Pamela then looked down and found a pile of cigarette butts at her feet that were not there before. Although she was a smoker, she did not remember smoking them. Pam then asked the husband what the time was, and he said 6 a.m. They had somehow lost 3 hours. They then went back to sleep, and in the morning, as they were sitting having a cup of tea, James said to his wife, "Did we imagine what happened to us last night? Did we really observe those balls of light bouncing around in the field?" The fact that both of them had observed the lights gave it credibility, as they both could not have shared the same dream. James then said that in those 3 lost hours, he recalled being in a circular room with a white bench and a translucent light coming through what looked like plastic. He was surrounded by figures dressed in white with pointed hats which resembled the Ku Klux Klan. As he was looking around at these strange figures, he found he was not frightened and even felt they had beneficial consequences. Pamela then said that rather than being a negative experience, they both felt enriched by the ordeal, and Pamela was certain that it was not a dream or their vivid imaginations. They were sure that the unusual event really happened. Although many experts questioned and doubted their unusual experience that evening, James said he knows what happened to him that night, and no psychiatrist or any other expert could tell him that they'd imagined the whole episode. Number 2. Didsbury, Manchester, England, 1979. It was a summer's evening when Linda Jones, her teenage daughter and young son were going on an evening stroll across a meadow. They had stopped to pick some flowers when her daughter suddenly looked up at the sky and screamed out, "Look, Mum, the moon's coming towards us." They all looked up, and Linda described a rugby ball-shaped object hurtling towards them at an angle. They all suddenly dropped to the grass, fearing it would strike them. Their first thought was that it was an aircraft on fire. Her daughter was absolutely terrified. They then got up off the ground and proceeded to run towards the hill to observe what had happened to the object. As they reached the top of the hill, they found themselves looking down at a craft that was shaped like a crescent moon. Linda said it was so close she could have gone up to it and touched it. Linda then felt herself drawn to the object and was curious as to what it could be. She could not believe what she was looking at and said it felt like a strange dream. She then got closer to the object, which was extremely bright, and she felt it burning her face. At the same time, her daughter was screaming at her to come back. Linda said she had never in her life seen such an unusual object. She then stopped and suddenly turned and ran back up the hill to her children. They were all now quite terrified and started running. When they arrived home, they found they could not account for the last 3.5 hours. The next morning, her husband noticed red marks under his wife's eyes, and her lips appeared burned and scaly. Linda knew the sores could not have come from the sun, as the day had been mild and overcast. In order to try and solve what had happened in the meadow, she decided to visit a hypnotist. She was then regressed and proceeded to tell the hypnotist about her ordeal, and was shocked when she heard it played back. In the recording, she describes watching the lights, but then adds that she was observing someone in the field standing next to the lights, and then feels herself floating. She then found herself in a room with tall people around her with black hair and large almond-shaped eyes, and they were wearing what looked like jumpsuits. There were shining lights on her face, and the room felt very icy. What confuses Linda is that she has never been interested in UFO stories and was not even interested in science fiction, and all she could say was, "Why us? Why did they choose us?" Number 1, Northamptonshire, England, 1978. Two women who did not know each other, and each driving along the same stretch of road, and within a few hours of each other, observed the same strange lights. One evening in 1978, 50-year-old Elsie Oakenson was driving home from work when she looked up and saw a brilliant red light on one side of the road and a brilliant green light on the other side. Elsie initially believed it was an aircraft, but as she got closer she realised the lights were attached to an object that was grey, smooth and plastic looking. What confused her was that as she was observing this strange object, she noticed that nobody else on the road seemed to be paying it any attention. Elsie then stopped the car, and as she looked up, she found herself looking at a huge dumbbell-shaped object with two bright lights underneath, which she said appeared perfect up against the darkening sky. She had no idea what the object was and had never seen anything like it in her life, and it was certainly not an aircraft or helicopter. But what was most unusual to her was that during this whole experience, she felt no fear at all. Elsie decided to get back into her car and continue her journey home. But a short distance ahead, her car engine started to malfunction, which greatly annoyed her as she had just only had it serviced. She even changed gears to try and get better acceleration, but the car just got slower and slower until it came to a sudden stop. At this stage, the lights in the sky had disappeared, but then all of a sudden, everything just went black, and she could see absolutely nothing around her. Suddenly, her car was encircled by a brilliant white light. Then the brilliant light suddenly went out, and the darkness returned. But then the lights came back and formed a pattern on the ground, going from left to right in a semicircle. The action began to repeat itself, going on and off and on and off. She then looked up through the windscreen to see where the lights were coming from, but all she could see was total darkness. But in a split second, Elsie observed that everything had gone back to normal, and she had somehow found herself driving again. When she arrived home, she checked her clock and found she had lost time. 2 hours later, and just 4 miles from Elsie's home, Georgina Laurie was driving with 2 friends, and her description of what she saw that evening matched Elsie's. She also observed a white light shining down through some trees, and as the light shined down, her car also started to falter. The light suddenly turned off, and then a red and green light appeared. But as Georgina continued driving, the light started to pace her car. The 2 lights then blended into one single white light, then shot off at an incredible speed. What concerned her most was that it made no sound whatsoever, and she insists it was not an aeroplane. Elsie Oakenson was so fascinated about her experience, and especially her lost time, that she decided to be hypnotised, and whilst under, she describes a white light coming towards her, but also complained of a headache. She then describes a small grey creature with curved lines around it, surrounded by a glow. After this unusual event, her friends and people she meets insist she had dreamt it all. She tells them, "I was there, you were not. You did not experience what I experienced. I know it really happened." Even though her ordeal was very strange and frightening, Elsie claims that it was a wonderful experience that changed her life. There have been hundreds of cases of UFO encounters where people have been cured of illnesses and diseases ranging from the basic common cold, cancer, and recovering from injuries. Some of these cases were verified by UFO investigators, doctors, and other officials who found it difficult to accept the fact that some of these people had been cured of a disease or recovered from an accident that science had no known cure or treatment for. The following are 3 incredible stories of people who encountered aliens and were either healed or miraculously recovered from injuries. Number 3. Chris Bledsoe. Chris Bledsoe was a commercial pilot who also had his own business, but found life difficult due to ill health. He suffered from an incurable condition called Crohn's disease, which he'd had for 15 years, and found life extremely painful. On the evening of January the 8th, 2007, Chris went fishing with his 7-year-old son, Chris Jr., and 5 workmates, and on that particular evening was not feeling too good and decided to go off hunting by himself, whilst his son and the other men stayed at the lake fishing. As the sun was setting, he came upon an open field and suddenly encountered 2 round objects the size of a bus, sitting about 100 feet above the trees. He described the colour of the objects as orange liquid fire, and being a pilot, he said they were certainly not of this world. His emotions were of deep, deep fear, and up until that moment, he had never ever thought of UFOs, and they had never ever entered his vocabulary. At this stage, he had become so frightened that he'd squatted down to avoid detection. Chris looked around for any means of escape, but as he looked back up, the sky appeared to open up like a zip, and then a 3rd object had joined the other 2, and at that very moment, he knew that he'd been seen by them. He was now so fearful that he suddenly found himself running, and eventually made his way back to the other men, and proceeded to tell them what he'd just experienced. His friends claimed that they'd been looking for him for hours, but to Chris, he felt he'd only been gone for about 20 minutes. He later found that he'd been missing for 4 hours. Chris asked where his son Chris Jr. was, and his friends said that he'd gone out looking for him. Chris then went in search of him and eventually found him in a panicked state, where he too had experienced unusual happenings. His son claims to have come upon 2 small beings who appeared to be red and glowing, wearing what looked like swimming goggles, and were about 3 feet tall. His son claims that as he was observing the aliens picking up cans and bottles, they suddenly spotted him. Then one of the aliens just stared at him, whereupon Chris Jr. suddenly became paralysed. He could not even scream. He claims his paralysis had stopped when the aliens must have seen the headlights of his father's truck. Chris and his son then made their way back to the other men, where everyone appeared wide-eyed and shocked. Suddenly, one of the men looked up and shouted that the sky was now full of at least 9 round objects, all slowly manoeuvring around each other, and then 3 of the objects landed on the other side of the river. Pandemonium had now set in as they all raced towards the truck. Chris was driving as fast as he could, with the other men screaming, "Go, go, go!" Suddenly, one of the men looked up and shouted that the sky was now full of at least 9 round objects, all slowly manoeuvring around each other, and then 3 of the objects landed on the other side of the river. Pandemonium had now set in as they all raced towards the truck. Chris was driving as fast as he could, with the other men screaming, "Go, go, go!" One of the men looked at the back and saw the terrifying sight of one of the small beings chasing them on all 4s. The truck then came upon the field where Chris had originally encountered the objects and suddenly slammed on the brakes. They were now observing 2 fiery objects sitting above the trees. They were so terrified they all thought the world was coming to an end. One of the egg-shaped crafts came towards them and was floating above the truck. The object was totally silent and then shot off into the sky. Chris drove home at full speed. This strange story did not end there. In the weeks that followed, they all started to experience strange events in their homes, seeing shadowy figures darting around the room and walking through walls, and Chris would hear footsteps running in the attic. After the incident, the other man went silent, and Chris had trouble trying to communicate his experience to his wife. Meanwhile, his son remained traumatized by the whole event. For the next year, Chris kept the whole incident to himself and suffered depression. The strangest thing was that ever since that night, when he had lost 4 hours of his life and had obviously been abducted, he no longer suffered from Crohn's disease, which he'd had for so many years. It had completely gone. Number 2. Dr. Fred Bell. In 1971 in Southern California, Dr. Fred Bell and 2 of his friends were the victims of a bomb explosion. All 3 were injured, where Dr. Bell was thrown off his feet and lost consciousness. He was rushed to Laguna Memorial Hospital. When he awoke, he discovered that his left hand, upper left shoulder and neck were badly burned. He also sustained a minor skull fracture and many painful bruises all over his body. What is unusual about this case is that Bell claims to have been in contact with human-looking aliens since childhood, called Pleiadians, and this had continued throughout his life. Bell claimed that they had always assisted him throughout his life with warnings and advice. At one time, they gave him a necklace called a receptor, which they said would protect him. While he was lying battered and bruised in hospital, he felt the necklace start to heat up and sent an energy throughout his whole body, and within minutes, he was completely healed. It was shortly after this event that he was visited by friends who watched in total amazement as he slowly removed his bandages, revealing no wounds. He was totally healed. The hospital physicians ran tests over his body but could find no answer to his miraculous cure. One of the physicians said, "This is impossible. You have no trace of the severe burns that had damaged your left hand, upper left shoulder and your neck. There is no longer evidence of a skull fracture, and your bruises have gone. How did this happen?" Because of the sudden and miraculous healing, the doctor then accused Bell of faking his injuries. Bell was now in perfect health and was released from hospital. Bell did not dare tell the doctors about the necklace, which had somehow cured him with its unknown energy. Number 1. Howard Menger. Ever since he was a little boy, Menger had had regular contact with aliens who claimed they were from various planets in the solar system, and in some cases came from different vibratory planes. Over the years, Menger claims to have had a lot of contact with aliens. He was even taken aboard a UFO and given a tour of the moon. He was told many predictions which later came true. Menger also claimed to have received a healing from the aliens. In April 1945, Howard Menger was a soldier during World War II and was on the Pacific island of Okinawa in the Pacific Ocean. After American warplanes had bombed the island, the American infantry were unable to take control. It was during this period when Menger was seriously wounded. As he was patrolling the airstrip, a shell from a nearby island landed on the airstrip. Menger then fell to the ground for protection. After the explosion, he thought he had escaped injury, but then felt something stinging in his right eye. He then put his hand to his eye and pulled out a piece of shrapnel. Although he received prompt medical treatment, his eye became badly infected and he lost sight of his right eye. Unfortunately, Menga's eye infection was so severe, it quickly spread to his other eye, and Menga was now totally blind in both eyes. It was at this low moment in his life that something happened in the hospital tent, where he was visited by an unidentified lady. Menga asked if she was a nurse, but she didn't reply, and told him that he was the one she had come to see, and was amazed that she seemed to know a good deal about him, and assured him that his sight would be restored. It was at this time that Menga felt that she was one of his extraterrestrial friends and was sent to help him. Gradually, Menga's sight returned, and he miraculously regained his sight. He was also able to see the woman who had come to assist him, and saw an attractive woman dressed in an army nurse's uniform. And although she had helped him greatly, she never made herself known directly. The nurse did however say to Menga that he would later meet someone very important. And a short time later, he had a strong urge to drive to a remote area of the island, where he met a human-looking extraterrestrial who told him that a terrible bomb would shortly be dropped. She was talking about the bombs that would hit Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The alien told him that we have been spending a lot of time healing and conditioning you and preparing you for your work to come. Howard Menga went on to write books and died in 2009, aged 87. Romford, London, England. On the 27th of October 1974, John Avis, 29, and his wife Elaine, 25, and their 3 children, Kevin, Karen and Stuart, had been visiting relatives at nearby Harold Hill in Romford in East London, UK. They left their relative's house at 9:50 p.m, as there was a TV program John wanted to see, which was due to start at 10:20 p.m. The drive to their home in Averley should have taken them 30 minutes. Karen and Stuart were asleep, but 7-year-old Kevin was awake and saw a blue oval light travelling alongside the car. As they approached Averley, the light passed in front of the car, then vanished. It was around 10 p.m. when things started to get weird. All noise inside the car seemed to have stopped, and the car radio began to smoke. Then a green mist enveloped the car as they continued to drive, before things appeared to return to normal. When they arrived home, John stayed in the car to fix the radio, and Elaine took the children indoors to put them to bed. She was shocked to find that it was now 1 a.m. The following day, the family were extremely tired, but decided to ignore what had happened to them on this strange journey home. However, over the next few months, their lives would take an unexpected turn. Shortly before Christmas, John Avis had a nervous breakdown, which led him to give up his job. But other strange anomalies started to affect the family, where they were now repulsed by the smell of meat and turned vegetarian. John, who had previously been a heavy smoker, abruptly stopped smoking. Then unusual incidents started to happen around their home, where objects started to disappear from the house. At around midnight, a loud droning noise could be heard, along with strange clicking noises that could be heard in some of the rooms. Their telephone started to make strange clicking noises as if it was being tapped by someone. On another occasion, one of the children had a terrifying experience where they claimed that a man dressed like a clown was standing beside their bed. 2.5 years later, in the middle of 1977, the family had had enough and decided to get some answers to the strange events which had begun on that unusual October night in 1974. They contacted UFO investigators Andy Collins and Barry King. The couple told the investigators what had happened on October the 27th, 1974, and ever since that night had experienced weird, vivid dreams that involved strange-looking beings and what looked to be hospital operating theatres. John and Elaine decided to undergo hypnosis, and what they described revealed what thousands of other abductees had also experienced, and was a classic textbook alien abduction scenario. Whilst on hypnosis, they explained how their car had been pulled upwards by a beam of light towards a strange craft, and when they were aboard the craft, they were medically examined by what they described as 4-feet-high creatures that resembled birds. They also observed other beings that were taller and wore one-piece suits and balaclava-style helmets. These beings appeared to be in charge of everything aboard the spacecraft. The following story appears to have been a classic UFO abduction, along with the strange incidents around their home. Many abductees claim to have experienced poltergeist activity afterwards. John Avis later admitted that this was not the first time that he had experienced something strange whilst driving, where one night in 1968 he observed what he believed was a UFO in the sky. Was he also abducted on that occasion, but had not realised it? Blackbrook Farm, South Yorkshire, England. One evening in early 1979, Joyce Bond was watching television in her family's 200-year-old farmhouse called Blackbrook in South Yorkshire in northern England. Joyce had 3 daughters, Laura 23, Jane 14 and Susan 10. It was 7:30 p.m. when her phone started ringing and her friend Sandra Streech was on the line. Sandra only lived about a quarter of a mile away. Her friend was calling because she and her mother had been observing strange lights in the sky, which had been circling above Blackbrook Farm. The lights appeared to be silent as they could hear no aircraft noise, yet they were making her dogs bark. But at the same time, Joyce's dogs were silent. Joyce and her daughters looked out of the window and saw a large red light hovering over their field. A neighbour had told her that there were also lights above her house, so Joyce went outside to investigate and saw a huge object directly above the stables. She had an eerie feeling that the object was watching them. The object was covered in flashing lights, and for a second she found them mesmerising, before quickly grabbing her daughters and running back inside the house. Joyce was so terrified that she locked all of the doors and switched off the lights. In a panicked state, she tried to escape through a small window before being pulled back inside. She then phoned her husband to come home. The family then decided to make a more organised attempt to escape by fleeing to a neighbour's house that was about 200 yards away. But something tried to stop them, and they ran back inside. When her husband reached the village, he was immediately stopped at a police roadblock and was told there had been a traffic accident. As Mr. Bond looked up into the sky, he could see aircraft from the nearby Air Force Base at RAF Finningley. He thought it strange as the aircraft from the base did not normally fly at night. He met a neighbour from a nearby farm who told him that he'd witnessed a UFO in the skies. He then met up with some friends who told him that they lived 2 miles from their house, where they described seeing a bright red light in the sky around 9 p.m. Now concerned, he decided to take an alternative route home, and as he got close to his farm, he could see that the top of their fence was on fire. Over the following days, he checked the local papers, but found nothing had been written about a road accident. A few years after the terrifying event, Joyce had always felt that they had somehow lost time and became disturbed. In 1994, they decided to contact UFO investigators who suggested they undergo hypnosis. The family would then regress back to the incident, but the session was not overly successful as the family feared what the hypnosis session may uncover. However, what they were able to find out was that Jane recalled floating above the farm and seeing bright lights before being manhandled by strange beings. The session proved to be so stressful for Jane that her hair started to fall out. The UFO investigators kept in regular contact with the family, and Jane and her daughters reported having strange dreams that involved small grey creatures with large black eyes. The family also reported other strange dreams where they were paralysed or naked in empty metal rooms. The girls, now much older, continued to describe having dreams that were flying or being sucked up into the sky above Blackbrook Farm, even though they no longer lived there. Laura would often dream of the UFO just as she fell asleep, and then seeing a door in the spaceship, but quickly woke up in fear of what may happen next. They all had the impression that Blackbrook Farm was haunted and would occasionally witness a floating white figure, which they did not initially associate with UFOs. One night in 1990 at the farm, Laura witnessed a glowing white apparition approach the back door, which frightened their dog. She switched off all of the lights and hurried upstairs to bed. That night she believed she'd been assaulted by an alien, and the following morning the dog was too scared to go outside. On another occasion, Mr. Bond believed he saw a ghost, and from 1979 the family believed the farm had a poltergeist. At the time, the girls were frightened to stay at the farm, and all claimed to have had strange experiences of their own. Joyce also claimed to have felt a presence in the bedroom at night and reported hearing laughter and sniffing along with banging on the back door when nobody was there. On one occasion, her earring was pulled by someone or something she could not see. In 1992, she saw their dog levitate. Her daughters had the waking sensation of being paralysed, while some invisible force in the bedroom held them down. When their daughters eventually left home, strange things continued to happen in their own homes, where they would often hear strange voices and lights. The family feared that the poltergeist activity would pass down to their grandchildren in their homes. The Bonds also claimed that they were visited by men in black, who intimidated them to ensure that the alien abductions were kept secret. Could it be that the Bond family were regularly visited by aliens, was at the same time being haunted by ghostly visitations, or was everything related to the aliens?
In the early hours of a seemingly ordinary morning in 1998, young John Pullman's life took an extraordinary turn. Living on Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas, 5-year-old John was preparing for his first day of school when he encountered something that would change his life forever. At 5 a.m, John was awakened by a strange, loud humming noise coming from outside his window. Curiosity overcame his initial fear, and he approached the window to investigate. What he saw defied explanation. A massive silver UFO hovering just outside, so large that it completely filled his field of vision. The craft's metallic surface gleamed like polished aluminium, adorned with white lights on its upper surface and light blue lights underneath. Terrified by the sight, John slammed his blinds shut and screamed for his father. When his dad rushed in, John frantically explained what he had seen. His father, sceptical but unconcerned, opened the blinds only to find nothing there. The mysterious craft had vanished without a trace. This incident marked the beginning of a series of encounters that would define John's childhood and adolescence. Night after night, he experienced vivid interactions with extraterrestrial beings. Initially, these encounters were marked by fear and confusion. The aliens would simply stare at John, their intentions unclear, and their attempts at communication incomprehensible. As time passed, John slowly developed the ability to understand the beings' telepathic communications. It was as if his mind was gradually tuning into their frequency, bridging the gap between his consciousness and theirs. The appearance of these extraterrestrial visitors was unlike anything John had ever seen. They had slim faces and bright green skin, with incredibly thin bodies featuring long arms and legs. Curiously, they wore no clothing and lacked any visible genitalia or sex characteristics. Their faces, while vaguely humanoid, were dominated by large eyes, and they appeared to have no visible ears. One of the most striking features of their beings was the texture of their skin. John described it as extremely soft, almost silk-like to the touch. Despite their organic appearance, they emitted a slight metallic odour, a scent that became inextricably linked to these nocturnal encounters in John's mind. The nature of these visitations often followed a similar pattern. John would find himself paralysed, unable to call for help or alert his parents. The beings would then transport him to what he assumed was their spacecraft. Here, they would place him on an examination table, studying him intently with their large eyes. Despite the invasive nature of these examinations, John never felt that the aliens intended to harm him. Their actions seemed driven by scientific curiosity rather than any form of malice. As John entered his early teens, a significant shift occurred in the nature of these encounters. At the age of 12, he made a conscious decision to overcome his fear and resistance. During one particular abduction, instead of struggling against the experience, John allowed himself to remain calm and open. This change in attitude seemed to alter the dynamic between him and his extraterrestrial visitors. For the first time, John found the courage to communicate directly with the beings. As he lay on the familiar examination table, he asked them what they were trying to do. The response he received was both surprising and profound. One of the aliens, communicating telepathically, revealed that their ultimate goal was to allow humans to live forever. This revelation was followed by an unexpected query from the alien. It asked John if he felt safe. The fact that these beings were concerned about his emotional state marked a turning point in their relationship. John, emboldened by this show of empathy, expressed that he did indeed feel safe. He then made a request that would change the nature of his experiences dramatically. He asked for a tour of their ship. What followed was a mind-bending journey through an environment that defied human understanding. John's memories of this tour remained fragmented, but certain details stand out with vivid clarity. He recalls seeing other humans undergoing examinations, and in one particularly striking instance, he witnessed what appeared to be a surgical procedure being performed on another abductee. The command centre of the craft left a particularly strong mark on John. It was a hub of advanced technology, with large monitors displaying strange alien text. But it was what lay beneath his feet that truly took his breath away. The floor of the command centre was transparent, offering an unobstructed view of Earth below. John found himself mesmerised by the sight. In the distance, he could make out a large, complex structure that he speculated might be the International Space Station. This marked the beginning of a new phase in John's encounters. Instead of being subjected to examinations, he was now given tours of the ship and introduced to more members of the alien crew. John met 3 additional entities and, over time, developed what he could only describe as a friendship with these beings. His ability to understand their telepathic communications improved, although he continued to respond verbally. As John's comfort with the aliens grew, so did the scope of his experiences. The beings began taking him on extraordinary journeys beyond Earth. One particularly memorable excursion brought John to a planet with vast maze-like fields of green. The exact location of this world remains a mystery to John, but he recalls the aliens pointing out Earth's sun, suggesting that they were still within the Milky Way galaxy. The alien world John visited was both familiar and strange. The environment was lush and green, reminiscent of Earth's most pristine landscapes. However, subtle differences hinted at its extraterrestrial nature. The sun that illuminated this world was dimmer than Earth's, casting a reddish glow reminiscent of a perpetual sunset, even with the sun positioned overhead. Strangely, John also never observed any insects or other animals during his visits. Thinking back on it, John wonders if this environment was a kind of Earth-like artificial construct, as it seemed highly unlikely to him that such life would have evolved to be so similar on an entirely different planet in the galaxy. This would also seem to explain the absence of any animal life. One of the most striking features of this alien world was its water. Unlike the typical blues and greens of Earth's oceans, the water here was a vibrant cyan or turquoise, reminiscent of the shallows of Lake Tahoe or a Fijian beach. The temperature was consistently pleasant, hovering around what John estimated to be the mid-70s Fahrenheit or around the mid-20s Celsius. It was during one of these otherworldly excursions that John received news that would bring this chapter of his life to a close. The aliens informed him that they would need to leave him alone for a while and that he would only see them one final time. This revelation filled John with a sense of loss and apprehension. True to their word, John's final encounter with the aliens occurred when he was 14 years old. This experience would prove to be the most intense and consequential of all his interactions with these beings. As he lay in bed one night, the familiar sensation of being transported overtook him. Once again, he found himself on the examination table aboard the alien craft. However, this time, one of his alien friends was there to greet him. The alien explained that they wanted to conduct one last test on John, but warned him that if he agreed, they would never be able to see him again. This news devastated John, who had grown close to these beings over the years. The alien emphasised the importance of this test, stating that it could potentially change the future of their research. Despite his emotional turmoil, John agreed to participate. What followed was a scene straight out of a science fiction movie. John was led to a silver egg-shaped pod encircled by bright red lights. Inside the pod was a chair with sharp drill-like instruments that hung ominously from the ceiling. As fear began to creep in, he asked for his friend, and two of John's alien friends appeared to comfort him. One held his hand, while the other transmitted soothing thoughts telepathically. An unfamiliar alien then approached, holding what appeared to be a large medical syringe filled with a bright neon green fluid. John, understandably apprehensive, asked if the procedure would be painful. The aliens, in a show of honesty, confirmed that it would indeed hurt, but reminded him of the importance of his contribution to their research. Summoning his courage, John nodded his head. The needle pierced his left arm, injecting the mysterious green fluid. The pain was intense, bringing tears to John's eyes. But as quickly as it had begun, the pain subsided, replaced by a strange tingling sensation. It was then that the aliens revealed the true nature of their experiment. The serum they had injected into John was designed to greatly extend the human lifespan. They warned him to keep this information secret, cautioning that revealing it could put him in danger. With their experiment complete, John's alien friends bid him an emotional farewell. As he was transported back to his bed, the gravity of what had just occurred began to sink in. Upon waking, John immediately checked on his arm, finding 3 green welts. In a moment of panic, he pressed on one of the blisters, causing it to burst and release its green fluid onto the bed sheets. He quickly popped the remaining 2. Overwhelmed, John called for his father, who rushed him to the emergency room upon seeing the state of his arm. Fearing ridicule or disbelief, John chose not to disclose the true origin of his injuries. The attending physician, lacking any other explanation, treated the wounds as chemical burns, prescribing burn cream and topical antibiotics to prevent infection. To this day, John bears 3 faint circular scars on his left arm, a permanent reminder of his final encounter with the aliens. These marks serve as tangible personal evidence of his extraordinary experiences, a link between the mundane world of everyday life and the cosmic mysteries he was privileged to glimpse. In the years since his last encounter, John has often reflected on the meaning and purpose of his interactions with these beings. He wonders why they chose him for their experiments and what the long-term effects of the serum might be. While he misses the aliens and the incredible experiences they shared, he takes comfort in the belief that his participation may have contributed to advancements that could benefit all of humanity. As for the efficacy of the alien serum, only time would tell. At 31 years old, John reports being in excellent health. He rarely falls ill, and when he does, the symptoms are mild. His ability to heal from injuries also seems somewhat faster than what would be expected, and many people he has met have assumed he was in his early to mid-20s. Whether these traits are the result of the alien intervention, good genes, or simply a healthy lifestyle remains to be seen. As John jestfully puts it, "Get back to me in 50 years and we'll know for sure." John Pullman's admittedly fantastical account, a caveat he readily acknowledges himself, is nevertheless an extraordinary one. Even if only a fraction of his story holds truth, it certainly challenges us to broaden our understanding of what may exist beyond our earthly realm and consider the possibility that we are not alone in the universe. Whether one chooses to believe his testimony or not, the impact these encounters have had on John's life is undeniable, leaving us to ponder the endless mysteries that still await discovery in the cosmos.
The following are two disturbing encounters with extraterrestrial life. American airman Victor Marshall's week-long ordeal in an underground facility with mysterious alien giants. Then Jacob Morley and his face-to-face meeting with a grey alien visitor in his Texas bedroom. Such accounts challenge our perception of reality and opened up the possibility of extraterrestrial contact. The Nephilim. In the mid-1960s, during the height of the Cold War, a young American airman named Victor Marshall experienced an event that would haunt him for the rest of his life. This is a story of his alleged abduction by beings not of this world, an incident that blurs the line between military secrecy and extraterrestrial contact. Victor, then 21 years old, was stationed at an Air Force base in West Germany. His official military records, specifically his discharge document known as DD-214, confirmed that he served in the Air Force between 1963 and 1966. This provides a verifiable time frame for the extraordinary account. One evening in 1966, while walking back to his barracks, Victor was suddenly and inexplicably abducted. Without warning or explanation, he found himself transported from the familiar surroundings of the military base to a strange underground facility. Confused and stripped to his underwear, Victor discovered he wasn't alone. Several other servicemen were with him, all equally bewildered. Their captors, described by Victor as Nephilim, were giant humanoid beings standing 7 to 8 feet tall. For about a week, Victor and the other soldiers were held against their will and subjected to a series of seemingly meaningless tasks. They assembled puzzles, memorized patterns, and performed physical exercises while under constant observation by the towering entities. Victor, in a small act of defiance, began intentionally making mistakes during these tasks, curious to see how the Nephilim would react. The situation grew even more surreal when Victor was offered the opportunity for intimate relations with human women who were also present in the facility. Victor declined their proposition, his mind struggling to comprehend the bizarre circumstances he found himself in. Throughout their captivity, the soldiers were kept in a state of confusion and disorientation. They were never told the purpose of their confinement or the reason for the tasks they were made to perform. The Nephilim maintained a clinical detachment, observing and recording but rarely interacting directly with the human subjects. After around a week of their strange imprisonment, chaos erupted without warning. The facility was suddenly rocked by a series of explosions. The thick steel doors that had kept them isolated were blown open, and a group of heavily armed personnel in unfamiliar and strangely unique uniforms and weapons stormed in. However, they were unmistakably human. These rescuers quickly took control of the situation. They ushered Victor and the other captives out of the facility, eventually returning their clothing and personal items. Under the cover of darkness, the soldiers were transported back to their respective posts. Before releasing them, the rescuers gave strict orders never to speak of what had transpired. For years, Victor kept this extraordinary experience a secret, even from his wife. The memory of it haunted him, contributing to post-traumatic stress disorder that would affect him for the rest of his life. It wasn't until he was in his twilight years, battling dementia, that Victor finally shared his story with his son Andrew. Andrew was initially skeptical of his father's tale. However, he was struck by the consistency of Victor's account. Even as Victor's health declined and his memory faded due to Lewy body and Parkinson's disease dementia, the details of this strange encounter remained vivid and unchanged. The story was always the same: the abduction, the giant beings, the puzzling tasks, the offered encounter with women, and the dramatic rescue. In the final years of his life, Victor became obsessed with alien movies. He told Andrew he was searching for anything that resembled his experience, desperate to find some validation for what he'd been through. This obsession, coupled with the unwavering consistency of his story, made Andrew wonder if there might be some truth to his father's incredible tale. After Victor's passing at the age of 78, Andrew, still contemplating the implications of his father's story, shared it with his uncle, Victor's brother. To Andrew's surprise, his uncle was already intimately familiar with the account, having heard it from Victor back in the 1960s, long before any signs of dementia had appeared. This corroboration from the past, along with the consistency of Victor's account, even in the advanced stages of dementia, left Andrew wondering. Could this incredible story of abduction actually be true? Had his father, a man known for his honesty and practical nature, really experienced an extraordinary encounter with beings from another world? Creature in the Corner. On a warm spring night in 2023, in a quiet suburb of Austin, Texas, an ordinary man's life was about to take an extraordinary turn. Jacob Morley settled into bed beside his wife Tricia, unaware that he was about to experience an encounter that would challenge his understanding of reality. As the time passed midnight, Jacob drifted into a restless sleep. In his dreams, he found himself standing in an unfamiliar kitchen, witnessing a scene straight out of a poltergeist movie. Drawers slammed open and shut, cabinet doors swung wildly, and the pantry door seemed to have a mind of its own. Gripped by fear, Jacob began to pray, his words a desperate attempt to ward off the unseen force. It was at this moment that Tricia, sensing her husband's distress, instinctively kicked his foot. The nudge jolted Jacob awake, and for a brief moment he felt relief wash over him. He turned to thank his wife, but received no response. Assuming she'd already fallen back asleep, Jacob rolled over, ready to settle back into what he hoped would be a more peaceful rest. But as his eyes adjusted to the darkness of their bedroom, Jacob saw something that made his blood run cold. There, standing silently in the corner by the bedroom door, was a figure unlike anything he'd ever seen before. The entity stood approximately 4 feet tall, his body thin and frail-looking. His skin was a dark, matte grey colour, almost blending into the shadows of the room. Long, slender arms hung at his sides, seemingly too delicate to be functional. The torso was small, almost childlike in proportion, topped by a narrow neck that supported the creature's most striking feature, its head. Disproportionately large and bulbous, the head dominated the being's entire form, but it was the eyes that truly captivated Jacob's attention. Huge, almond-shaped and jet black, they wrapped slightly around the sides of the creature's head. These dark orbs stared directly at Jacob, unblinking and unwavering. The being looked exactly like the stereotypical grey alien, often described in UFO encounters and popular culture, a realization that both fascinated and terrified him. Jacob's first instinct was to doubt his own senses. He rubbed his eyes, certain that this apparition was merely a lingering effect of his recent nightmare. But when he looked again, the figure remained as real and present as the bed beneath him. In an attempt to rationalize what he was seeing, Jacob began to look around the room, expecting to find the same visual anomaly in the other corners. He scanned the ceiling, the floor, and the walls, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Yet every time his eyes returned to the corner by the door, the entity remained, watching him with an unnerving stillness. Remembering the flashlight he kept by the bed, a precaution against the notoriously unreliable Texas power grid, Jacob slowly reached for it, his hand trembling. He switched on the beam and directed it towards the corner where the being stood. To his amazement, the creature became less visible in the direct light. It was still there, but now appeared even more transparent, as if it existed in a state between our world and another. Determined to prove to himself that he wasn't hallucinating, Jacob carefully swept the flashlight beam across the entire room. Every other corner, every shadow, appeared normal under the harsh light. It was only in that one spot by the bedroom door that the strange anomaly persisted. As Jacob switched off the flashlight, the being came back into clear focus, its large eyes still fixed unwaveringly upon him. In a final desperate attempt to dispel the vision, Jacob squeezed his eyes shut tightly, silently willing the entity to disappear. But when he opened them again, it remained as real and present as ever. Faced with the undeniable presence of something truly extraordinary, Jacob felt a wave of panic wash over him. His heart raced and his palms grew clammy with sweat. In this moment of intense fear and confusion, Jacob found himself frozen, unable to look away from the otherworldly being. Then, suddenly, something remarkable happened. The alien entity, which had remained motionless throughout the encounter, began to change. Jacob watched in astonishment as the being slowly started to fade from view. It was as if he was being erased from reality, becoming more and more transparent with each passing second. The process took about 20 seconds in total, during which time the creature maintained his unnerving stare. Its huge black eyes remained fixed on Jacob until the very last moment, when it simply vanished. One instant it was there, a faint outline against the darkness of the room, and the next it was gone, leaving Jacob alone with his racing thoughts and pounding heart. As the first rays of dawn began to creep through the curtains, Jacob found himself wide awake, unable to process what he had just experienced. He didn't wake Tricia, unsure of how to even begin explaining what had happened. Instead, he reached for his phone and began searching online, desperate for any information that might help him make sense of his encounter. In the days and weeks that followed, Jacob struggled to come to terms with what he had seen. He found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about the nature of reality and our place in the universe. The experience had shaken him to his core, leaving him with a mix of fear, wonder, and an insatiable curiosity. His religious beliefs were also challenged in ways he'd never anticipated. Jacob found himself pondering how the existence of extraterrestrial life might fit into his Christian worldview, or whether this being might have even been spiritual in nature. What makes Jacob's encounter particularly intriguing is the entity's reaction to light. Could the being lower visibility when illuminated by the flashlight suggest the possibility of some advanced light-bending camouflage technology? As with such encounters, Jacob's experience left him with more questions than answers. Was this truly a visitation from an extraterrestrial being? Could it have been some sort of interdimensional entity? Or was it, as skeptics might suggest, simply a vivid hallucination brought on by the state between sleep and wakefulness, known as sleep paralysis?
The following is a collection of two compelling accounts of alleged alien encounters that offer detailed descriptions of otherworldly beings and events. Accompany Will Ferguson on his 1980 sailing trip as he encounters a massive city of lights hovering next to his boat, and join Kian Amini in his Ontario dorm room during a startling nighttime visitation in 2008. Both experiences challenged the witnesses' perceptions of reality and left them with lingering questions about what it was they encountered. City of Lights. In the summer of 1980, Will Ferguson's seemingly ordinary sailing trip from Bermuda to New England with his wife would lead to an extraordinary close encounter with an otherworldly presence that would forever change him. It was approximately 3 a.m. when Will was jolted from his sleep by an unfamiliar humming sound. Intrigued and slightly alarmed, he ascended the companionway ladder to investigate. What he witnessed next defied explanation and would etch itself into his memory for decades to come. Off the starboard side of his boat, Will beheld what he could only describe as a city of lights. This massive, well-defined structure hovered above the water, seeming to defy the laws of physics as we know them. The object possessed multiple levels, each adorned with an array of lights that seemed to emanate from within its core. As Will stood transfixed, the phenomenal craft began to change. The light emanating from it shifted in hue and intensity, accompanied by an alteration in the pitch of its hum. The frequency of the vibration also intensified, and Will reported feeling it resonate within his own body, a sensation both alien and oddly familiar. What happened next pushed the boundaries of human experience even further. Will recounts feeling overwhelming emotion, with tears streaming down his face. Although curiously, he reports these tears feeling extremely cool on his skin. In a moment that seemed to defy gravity, he found himself suspended in air, enveloped in what he described as a column of light and energy distinct from the surrounding space. In this transitional state of being enshrouded by diffuse light and persistent vibration, Will suddenly experienced a slow shift in his movement, as if being accelerated. He likens the sensation to gradually putting the foot down on the accelerator pedal. He then describes himself slowly beginning to move towards the craft, eventually passing through a threshold, marking his entry into its interior. Once inside, Will experienced a profound shift in his sense of self. He no longer felt like the same person who had been standing on the deck of his sailboat moments earlier. He was no longer Will. The interior of the craft was populated by tall, translucent beings, estimated to be between 7 and 8 feet in height. Strange, however, was that one of these beings seemed to recognise him, seeming to offer a deeper care and attention than the others. These entities, despite their otherworldly appearance, possessed a beauty that Will struggled to articulate. He described them as having a bluish tint, with forms that were more suggested than clearly defined, as their limbs and extremities were indistinct. As Will attempted to process the scene before him, he found himself overcome with emotion. The beauty he perceived in these beings seemed to transcend human aesthetic ideals, touching something deep within his psyche. When he looked into these entities, he was met with a profound sense of recognition and connection. The being's eyes, if they could be called that, seemed to hold depths of wisdom and understanding beyond human comprehension. Will's encounter continued as he found himself drawn deeper into the extraordinary experience. He reported feeling a sense of timelessness, as if the normal rules of progression no longer applied. The interior of the craft also seemed to shift and change, defying the logic of three-dimensional geometry. Spaces opened and closed, revealing glimpses of forms far beyond anything he had ever seen or imagined. Communication with the beings was unlike anything Will had ever experienced before. There were no words exchanged, no sounds uttered, yet he felt a flood of information and emotion coursing through his mind. Ideas, concepts and images flashed before his mind's eye, conveying complex messages that he struggled to fully comprehend. As the encounter continued, Will became aware of a sense of purpose behind the event. Though he couldn't articulate it clearly, he felt that these beings were imparting something crucial, perhaps a warning or a message of hope for humanity's future. The emotional impact was overwhelming, leaving him simultaneously elated and deeply unsettled. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the experience came to an end. Will found himself back on his sailboat, the vast city of lights receding into the distance before vanishing entirely. Will's story, while extraordinary, is not unique among reported extraterrestrial encounters. It bears similarity to other accounts of close encounters, particularly in the described sensations of timelessness, telepathic communication, and the profound emotional impact on the witness. Skeptics might argue that Will's experience could be attributed to a vivid dream, hallucination, or the effects of isolation at sea. However, the consistency and detail of his account, along with the lasting impact it had on his life, suggests an experience that goes beyond mere imagination or misperception. The Newmarket Incident. In the quiet town of Newmarket, Ontario, nestled in the heart of Canada, an extraordinary event unfolded in the fall of 2008. This is the story of Kian Amini, a young Iranian international student who found himself face to face with the unknown in an encounter that would challenge his perception of reality and leave him questioning the boundaries of our universe. Kian had recently arrived in Canada, a world away from his home in Iran. Adjusting to life at a boarding school in Newmarket, he shared a modest dormitory room with a Chinese student known to sleep through even the loudest disturbances. Little did Kian know that on one fateful night, while his roommate slept soundly, he would experience an otherworldly visitation. The night began like any other. Kian, the last to go to bed, completed his evening routine and entered the locked room. The windows were sealed against the cool autumn air, and his roommate was already lost in dreams. Kian settled into bed, facing the wall, his mind drifting towards sleep. Suddenly, 3 distinct knocks pierced the silence. Initially dismissing the sound, Kian rolled over, his eyes reflexively opening. What he saw next would be etched into his memory forever. There, barely a metre from his bed, stood a being that defied explanation. It resembled the classic depiction of a grey alien, but with notable differences. Its skin was paler, almost ghostly in the dim light. Large, almond-shaped eyes dominated its face, yet they appeared to be squinting, as if adjusting to the darkness of the room. The entity stood no taller than a metre, its slender form a stark contrast to the familiar shapes of the dormitory furniture. As Kian's eyes widened in disbelief, the creature slowly turned its head. Their gazes locked, and in that instant, Kian felt an overwhelming force take hold of him. His eyes slammed shut involuntarily, and his body became rigid, paralysed by an unseen power. For what seemed like an eternity, but was likely only around 15 seconds, Kian struggled against this invisible restraint. Finally, with a surge of adrenaline fueled by primal fear, Kian broke free from the paralysis. He bolted upright, a cry of shock escaping his lips as he frantically reached for the bedside light. The warm glow illuminated the room, revealing nothing. The alien had vanished without a trace. The door remained locked, the windows sealed. His roommate slumbered on, oblivious to the extraordinary event that had just transpired. Heart pounding, Kian spent the next 20 minutes in a state of heightened alertness. He searched every corner of the room, even venturing into the hallway, but found no evidence of the intruder. The dormitory's elevated position made access from the outside nearly impossible without a ladder. As the initial shock began to subside, Kian reluctantly returned to bed, his mind racing with questions. Just as he was beginning to convince himself it had been a vivid hallucination, 3 more knocks shattered the silence. This time, Kian's alert mind registered a crucial detail. The sound came from the window glass. Without hesitation, he leapt from the bed, switched on the light and rushed to the window. But once again he was met with nothing but the dark, empty night. No strange lights, no hovering craft, no pale alien form retreating into the shadows. In the years following the incident, Kian has analysed his experience. He's certain it wasn't a case of pareidolia, the psychological phenomenon of perceiving familiar patterns when none exist. The entity he saw was too distinct, too three-dimensional to be a trick of the mind. Kian has also ruled out sleep paralysis, a condition he would come to experience in later years. The paralysis he felt during the encounter was instantaneous and total, which was unlike the gradual onset and partial awareness typical of sleep paralysis episodes. Moreover, the speed with which he regained control of his body doesn't align with the lingering effects often associated with sleep paralysis. The possibility of a prank by fellow students has been thoroughly dismissed. The room's layout, with its sparse furnishings and lack of hiding spaces, coupled with Kian's habit of always locking the door, makes such an explanation implausible. As Kian recounts the events of that night, he often wonders about the entity's purpose. Was it there for him or for his soundly sleeping roommate? The alien's position near his roommate's bed raises intriguing questions about its intentions. Curiously, Kian's roommate was transferred to a different room shortly after the new year and replaced by a fellow Iranian student due to conflicts he was having with his former roommates. The encounter in Newmarket permanently changed Kian's perspective on life. Though brief, the image of the pale, squinting entity has remained vivid in his mind. The inexplicable nature of the event, from the paralysing gaze to the mysterious knocks on the window, continue to unsettle and baffle Kian. Sharing his story with MUFON helped Kian contextualise his experience. While there are undoubtedly more elaborate cases out there, Kian's account stands out for its sudden and fleeting nature. In Totowa, New Jersey, lived Nona Rossi, a woman whose life would forever be changed by one extraordinary encounter. It was January 1993 when Nona's world shifted dramatically, setting her on a path that would challenge her understanding of reality and push the boundaries of her consciousness. One fateful morning, on January 12, 1993, Nona awoke at precisely 1:15 a.m. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, a shiver of fear ran through her. She was not alone. Robed figures, their faces obscured by hoods, stood silently around her bed. The air in the room seemed to crackle with electric tension, as if charged by the static before a storm. Suddenly, a beam of light, unlike anything Nona had ever seen before, appeared. It wasn't just an ordinary light. She described it as a shaft of liquid, crystalline light. This ethereal beam entered through the top of her head, and in that moment, Nona's body began to react in ways she couldn't comprehend or control. Violent convulsions overtook her. Her limbs jerked and shook with an intensity that terrified her. In those moments of uncontrolled movement, A single thought echoed in Nona's mind. She was going to die. The fear was overwhelming, coursing through her veins alongside the strange energy that had invaded her body. But the hooded beings didn't stand idly by. With a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the violent reaction of Nona's body, they placed their hands upon her. Their touch seemed to guide the energy, helping it to settle within her physical form. Gradually, the convulsions subsided, leaving Nona in a state of bewildered calm. As the chaos in her body quieted, one of the beings stepped forward. In its hand, it held an ankh, the ancient Egyptian symbol of life. With a voice that seemed to resonate within Nona's mind, rather than through the air, the being spoke. "This is the magic." The words hung in the air, laden with a significance that Nona couldn't yet fully grasp. Just as suddenly as they had appeared, the beings vanished, leaving Nona alone in her bedroom. The encounter had lasted mere minutes, but its effects would linger far longer. As the sun eventually began to rise, Nona found that her ordeal was not over. Her entire body shook as if an electrical current was running through every cell. The vibrations were intense, unlike anything she had ever experienced before. This encounter marked the beginning of a journey that would lead Nona to seek understanding and validation. It wasn't until April 1996 that she found herself in the office of Dr. John Mack, a respected psychiatrist known for his work with individuals who claimed to have had extraterrestrial encounters. Accompanied and observed by her friend Roberta Colasanti, Nona prepared to delve even deeper into the memories of that morning in 1993. As Nona recounted her experience under Dr. Mack's guidance, the energy of that morning seemed to resurface. Her body began to react, mimicking the sensations she had felt years before. "I felt a vibration at the top of my head," she exclaimed, her voice strained with the effort of describing the indescribable. "It's like somebody stuck something up your spine." They watched in astonishment as Nona's body appeared to relive the event. She moaned and breathed heavily, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "I feel like it's stuck," she managed to say, between laboured breaths. "It's like every part of my body's waking up." Dr. Mack, maintaining a centred and focused composure, gently probed for more details. Nona described the sensation spreading through her body. Her hands, her face, her shoulders, all vibrating with the same indescribable energy. "My legs are starting to vibrate," she continued. "My knees, I can feel it going down. It's in my calves. It's moving through my entire body. And my body feels very light. It's getting lighter." As Nona delved deeper into the memory, she described feeling encased in something, a capsule or container of energy that she could see through. As she worded it, it was a sarcophagus of energy wrapped around me. The beings were there, but not right beside her. She recalled one being standing at her feet, holding the golden ankh, reiterating its message about magic. Throughout the session, Nona struggled with the incredibility of her own memories. "Part of me is saying, 'No, you can't be up here hanging in the air,'" she admitted, her voice tinged with disbelief. Dr. Mack encouraged her to simply be present with her experience, assuring her that they could figure out the physics, the possibility, the impossibility later. Nona's recollection continued, describing a journey through light. "I'm inside the beam of light," she said. "I'm going up, and there's a hole above me, and it's dark, but there's light all around it. It's like a blue light." She found herself in a dome-like structure, alone and uncertain. The session took a darker turn as Nona recalled a traumatic experience of lying on a cold, metal-like surface. She remembered feeling pressure and fear as something was forced into her ear. This memory was corroborated by physical evidence. Nona had woken up with blood on her pillow and in her ear, and doctors had noticed scar tissue in that ear. As the session concluded, the energy in the room was distinctly elevated. Nona's friend remarked on the powerful presence they had felt, describing how her own body had vibrated with the intense energy. In the weeks and months that followed, Nona reflected deeply on her experience. She believed that this encounter had profoundly changed her, both mentally and physically. "My whole being feels like it's running at a higher vibration, a higher frequency level," she explained to Dr. Mack in a follow-up session. Nona's perspective on her experience was multifaceted. She recognised that such encounters could be interpreted in vastly different ways, as terrifying abductions or as spiritually uplifting interactions with beings who cared and shared important information. For Nona, the key lay in what one brought to the experience and how one chose to perceive it. The information imparted during this encounter resonated deeply with Nona. She spoke of a newfound understanding of humanity's disconnection from the earth, from each other, and from the interconnected nature of all things. "We keep ourselves as separate entities, not as one," she explained. Nona eventually connected with others who had undergone similar encounters. One such individual was Carol, another self-described abductee. Their meeting proved to be a profound experience for both women. Nona recounted, "It's overwhelming what happens when we're together. It's just this incredible energy." This connection reinforced Nona's belief that their experiences had fundamentally altered them. "I believe we have been shifted or changed in some form," she explained. "Not just some form, a vibratory form, a vibratory way. It is like we're accelerating." Nona's words suggest a belief that their encounters had attuned her and Carol to a higher frequency of consciousness or perception, one that allowed them to resonate with each other and their surroundings in a way that more closely aligned with the connected nature of things and helped elevate their state of being within that realization. Critics have proposed that Nona's experience could be attributed to sleep paralysis or seizure-induced hallucinations. However, these explanations are challenged by Nona's lack of history with such conditions and the uniqueness of this event in her life. The presence of the ankh symbol in Nona's account has also been cited as evidence for the psychological origin of her experience. However, defendants counter that advanced beings might deliberately use familiar symbols to facilitate communication or induce specific mental states aligning with how symbols function in human spiritual practices. Perhaps most compelling is the physical evidence related to Nona's ear. She recalled something being forcibly inserted into one of her ears during the encounter, and later reported finding blood in the very same ear and on her pillow. Medical examinations also revealed unexplained scar tissue in her ear, providing further tangible physiological evidence that challenges purely psychological explanations. Nona's journey from that January morning in 1993 to her sessions with Dr. Mack in 1996 and beyond powerfully demonstrates the bizarre and profound nature of the alien abduction phenomenon. Nona's account, like many other reported extraterrestrial encounters, challenges conventional understandings of reality and consciousness. It also illustrates the profound impact such extraordinary experiences can have on an individual's worldview and perception of existence. As Nona continues to navigate the implications of her encounter, she remains receptive to the new possibilities it has unveiled. Her account serves as compelling evidence that our universe may harbour deeper mysteries than we may be ready to acknowledge, and reminds us that transformative insights can often emerge from the most unexpected of ordeals.